Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit.
How y'all doing this evening? Well, you see me. I think you know who I am. I come to you. I don't even have to say my name. Well, hello, fam. I'm a special guest here tonight on Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit. And I came by as a savior, being the Holy Savior. I was hanging out in heaven as usual, and I was listening to some of the prayers and calls coming in from the black folk in America. Negroes, the coloreds, tar babies, as my good folk, quote unquote, my folk would say. And so I tapped into the Negroes and their prayers, and I saw a lot of despair, a lot of tears, a lot of pain. And a lot of it was the Negroes didn't know their name. And one of them said, I know you. You are you. I said, yeah. And he said, you know what? It surely is hard for us that believe in you. You know, your folks, they think they better than us. They got it better than us. They doing better than us. And we've been waiting so long and so strong. We just wanted to know what's going on. I was like, wow, they said they was better than y'all. Well, you know, you know how folks get a little something, something, and they get all proud and whatnot. But I tell you what, you go ahead, you keep praying, you keep being faithful. I'm gonna go have a talk with them folk and let them know a few things. So, as a guest, I wanted to come on over here, and you know me, you see me. So, on behalf of the Negroes, I'm come here to talk to my folk about some of the blessings that they have, some of the power and the control they are exercising currently. And so I just wanted to let them know where it all come from, just so they know that everything, in fact, is equal. So I was thinking of just giving some information on my folk going forward so that they'll know, hey, everybody has a time to be the head and the tail. The first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first. So y'all, my folks, y'all hang on. My people's up in the Roman Catholic Church and all of the other religions of the world of Christianity. Want to give you a little history of the privilege and circumstance of complexion. So y'all folk hang on, pull up a nice little chair. We're going to go over some history. And here we go. A long history of racial preferences, especially those who grew up in the suburbs and nice area. They like to think that they got there by virtue and merit, hard work, intelligence, pluck, and maybe a little luck. And while there may be some sympathy for the plight of others, we shut down when we hear words like affirmative action and racial preferences. You see, we worked hard. We made it on our own. Then, why don't those people? After all, it's been almost over 40 years, 50 years since the Civil Rights Act was passed for those Negroes. Well, I think we need to acknowledge, my people, your preference has a long institutional history in America, a white history, if you want to say. And I'm just an outline of a few ways the government programs and practices have channeled wealth and opportunities to us white folks at the expense of others. So here's the history. Affirmative action in American workplace first began in the late 17th century with European indentured servants, the original source of unfree labor on new tobacco plantations in Virginia and Maryland. The indentured European servants were replaced by African slaves. So those Negroes y'all brought over here replaced your European indentured servants who you had to release from contract after 7 years, and they got paid. Now, in exchange for their support and helping to police this new slave population, the lower class Europeans won new rights, entitlements, and opportunities from the plantation elite. So the white Americans were given a head start with the help of the U.S. Army. The 1830 Indian Removal Act, for example, forcibly relocated Cherokee natives, Creeks, and other Eastern indigenous natives to the west of the Mississippi River to make room for new white settlers. The 1862 Homestead Act followed suit, giving away millions of acres for free of the land that had been in native indigenous territory west of the Mississippi. Ultimately, 270 million acres, or 10% of the total land area of the United States, was converted to private hands, overwhelmingly white, under Homestead Act provisions. So y'all just were given free land by the government, protected by the military after we drove all those indigenous, savage Native Americans off. Now, the 1790 Naturalization Act permitted only white persons to become naturalized citizens, thus opening the door for the whole span of European immigrations, but no one else. So only the Europeans could become naturalized citizens. Now, only the citizens could vote, serve on juries, hold office, and in some cases, even hold property. In this century, alien land laws passed in California and other states reserved farmland for white growers by preventing Asian immigrants ineligible to becoming citizens from owning or leasing land. Immigration restrictions further limited opportunities for non-white people groups. Racial barriers to naturalize U.S. citizenship were not removed until the McCarran-Walker Act in 1952, white folk. That's almost 200 years of these preferences of immigration and land ownership and power up until 1965. In the South, the federal government never followed through on General Sherman's Civil War plan to divide up plantations and give each newly freed slave 40 acres of land and a mule as reparations for the centuries of the slavery you held them in to build the nation. Only once was monetary compensation made for slavery in Washington, D.C. There, government officials paid up to $300 per slave upon emancipation, not to the slaves, but to the local slave holders as compensation for the loss of their subhuman property. Now, when slavery ended, white folks, the legacy lived on not only in the impoverished conditions of the Negro people, but in the wealth and prosperity that accrued to the white slave owners, the plantation elites, and their descendants. Now, modern economists who try to place a dollar value on how much white Americans profited from 200 years of unpaid slave labor, including interest, begin the estimates at around $1 trillion as a base minimum. A trillion, 1,000 of $1 billion. It's a lot of money, white folk. Y'all got off them Negroes. Jim Crow laws, the de facto form of slavery, instituted in the 19th and early 20th century and not overturned in many states until the 60s, reserved the best jobs, neighborhoods, schools, and hospitals for white people only. Now, less known are some of the recent government racial preferences that still benefit the white folk, the folk. First enacted during the New Deal that directed wealth to white families and continue to shape life opportunities and chances today. The landmark Social Security Act of 1935 provided a safety net for millions of workers, guaranteeing them an income after retirement. But the act specifically excluded two occupations: agricultural and domestic servants, who were predominantly African American Negroes, Mexicans, and Asian. And as low income earners and workers, they also had the least opportunity to save for retirement. So they couldn't pass wealth on to their children. But the opposite, the children had to support them. Now, like Social Security, the 1935 Wagner Act helped establish an important new right for white folk by granting unions the power of collective bargaining. It helped millions of white workers gain entry into the middle class over the next 30 years. But the Wagner Act permitted unions to exclude non-whites and deny them access to better paying jobs and union protection and benefits such as healthcare, job security, and pensions. Many of the craft unions remained nearly all white well into the 1970s. In 72, for example, every single one of the 3,000 members of Los Angeles Steam Fitters Local 250 was still white. But it was another racialized New Deal program, the Federal Housing Administration, that helped generate much of the wealth that so many white folk enjoy today. These revolutionary programs made it possible for millions of average white Americans, but not other groups, to own a home for the first time. The government of the United States set up a national neighborhood appraisal system, explicitly tying mortgage eligibility to race. Integrated communities were ipso facto deemed a financial risk, and made ineligible for home loans, a policy known as redlining. Between 1934 and 1962, the federal government backed $120 billion of home loans. More than 98% went to white families. Of the 350,000 new homes built with federal support in Northern California, for example, between 1946 and 1960, fewer than 100 of the 350,000 homes went to Negro Americans. These government programs made it possible to segregate white communities that sprang up around the country after World War II. Government subsidies for municipal services helped develop and enhance the suburbs further, in turn fueling commercial investments. Freeways tied to new suburbs and linked them to central business districts, but they often cut through, devastated, and destroyed the vitality of non-white neighborhoods in that same central city. Today, Black and Latino mortgage applicants are still 60% more likely than white folk to be turned down for a loan, even after controlling for employment, financial, and neighborhood factors. According to the census, white folk are more likely to be segregated than any other American group. As recently as 1993, 86% of suburban whites still lived in neighborhoods with a Black population of less than 1%. One result of the generations of preferential treatment and privilege for whites is that a typical white family today has on average 8 times the assets or net worth of a typical Negro American family. According to New York University economists, even when families of the same income are compared, white families have more than twice the wealth of Black families. Much of that wealth difference can be attributed to the value of one's home and property and how much one inherited from previous generations. But a family's net worth is simply the finish line, or it's not simply the finish line. It's a starting point for the next generation. Those with assets pass on wealth to their children by financing a college education, lending a hand in hard times, or assisting with a down payment for a home. Economists estimate up to 80% of lifetime wealth accumulation depends on those intergenerational transfers. White advantage and privilege is passed down from parent to child to grandchild. As a result, the racial wealth gap and the head start enjoyed by white folk appears to have grown since the civil rights days. In 1865, just after emancipation, it's not surprising that African American, Negro, Black, Afro, colored Americans only own 0.5% of the total wealth of the United States. By 1990, a full 135 years after the abolition of slavery, Black Americans still possess only a meager 1% of national wealth. As a legal scholar remarked, the slick thing about whiteness is that whites are getting the spoils of a racist system, even if they are not personally racist. But rather than recognize how racial preference and privilege have tilted the playing field and given white folks a head start in life, many white folk continue to believe that race does not affect their lives. Instead, they chastise others for not achieving what they have, even if the situation is inverted and there's accusations made against the white privilege. The charge of using the race card is used. Or the suggestion that different outcomes may simply result from differences in natural ability or motivation. However, research shows that when comparisons of performance across families of different racial lines who not make the same income, but also who not only make the same income, but also hold similar net wealth and worth, a very surprising, interesting thing happens. When everything is aligned equally, many of the racial disparities in education, graduation rates, welfare usage, and other outcomes disappear. The performance gap between whites and non-whites is a product not of nature, but unequal circumstances created within the institutions. Colorblind policies that treat everyone the same, no exceptions for minorities, are often counterposed against affirmative action. But colorblindness today merely bolsters the unfair advantages that color-coded practices have enabled white folks in America to continually accumulate vast amount of wealth. Isn't it a little late in the game, white folk, to suddenly say race doesn't matter? Oh man. So I knew all this information, and I watch how the game plays out from the heavens. And my Father is the beginning and end of all. So, wanted to come on and tell my folks that you're not better than the Negroes or any other of the people. You're not smarter. You're not faster. It is just a point in time of the evolving and changing empires of Earth that must play out before I return and set everything in order. And I'll give you a hint, white folk. Them black folk, they pray hard, they sing hard, they love hard, and they true to the game. Nobody's perfect, but when I come back, I'm going to the barbecue. So everybody stay safe. Everybody stay prayed up. Believe it or not, we will see each other again. And I'll be coming back to tell you about the privilege of circumstance. So, Catholic Church, I see you. You pastors and nuns, I see you. And I'm watching out for my little kids. So don't be surprised when you see a crack in the skies. Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit.